I support a new investigation wholeheartedly. It's a given. And when you stop and think what's happened in the last 9 years, where a voluntary investigation has taken place by people like architects and engineers and other scientific groups, and have put forth a plethora of knowledge that questions what the government said about the event. And so we need an investigation to look at this, take up all of the information that these voluntary groups have put forward, and pursue that scientific knowledge that's there to its conclusion. And that conclusion is that something happened, and it wasn't, and it's not what the government led us to believe happened. This is very serious. We're talking about an event in American history that there's no comparison by and large. Here it's initiated 3 wars. One war in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and a war on terror, which is obviously not a war, but it's a device to sustain the American efforts to fund the military-industrial complex. That's what's at stake. And of course, the view is that, well, who's going to initiate this investigation? Well, there's only 2 possibilities. One is the Congress, the other is the people. Now, the Congress has not seen fit to pursue this, and there's very obvious reasons why. Members of Congress or political leaders have a stake in their own perpetuity, getting reelected, staying in power, and so they do not want to associate themselves with issues that are not a win-win. And since the government and the media has marginalized these efforts to re-examine what happened on 9/11, and they've marginalized it to such a degree, calling this conspiracy theories. We're not talking about any conspiracy theory here. We're talking about scientific evidence that has been put forth for any reasonable person to look at and question and say, hey, there's something wrong here. And so that's where we're at this point in time. And it's vital for us to get to the bottom of these events, what led up to 9/11, what happened on 9/11, and what happened in the aftermath of 9/11. All of that must be re-examined. And of course, what you get from political leaders is, and we saw this with Gerald Ford when he was president, and he pardoned Richard Nixon with the approach that, the people couldn't take another crisis like this. That's not so. The American people are stronger than we realize, and they have some fundamental values which have been covered over by the government. And so what we need to understand is the people can handle this investigation wherever it leads and whatever it uncovers. And they'll handle it maturely. And that is vital to the survival of our democracy. And absent that, we are in very serious difficulties for the future. There's only 2 venues where a solution can be applied to. And one is the Congress, our political leaders, and the other is the people. A&E 9/11 Truth has put together a petition that will be submitted to the Congress. I want to applaud that effort, but I want to be realistic and tell you that the Congress, under the present circumstances, may not be all that responsive, unfortunately. But that's changing, because as you begin to get public officials who will own up to their interest in having the investigation take place, you will overcome the peer pressure that exists within the Congress to not act or to castigate any member who stands up asking for action. So that's a dynamic that will go on over time. I think the other dynamic could deal with the subject a lot more rapidly, and that is the possibility of going to the people with an initiative process. Now, we have 24 states in the United States where people can make policy decisions irrespective of the government. And what we're attempting to do now is to draft an initiative for the state of California. Then take that identical language and take it to other states so that we could get maybe 5, 10 states across the country that would all vote at the same time, which would be November 2012, which means that the issue of a new investigation would become part of the electoral process and would be a hot potato political issue for the people running for Congress and the people running for president, because it would be so visible at the time. This is the only way I can see to overcome the fact that the media won't pay attention to this subject. But the media here too exists under peer pressure. Unless you see somebody in the media substantially stepping forward and calling for this, the others will just stay quiet. The program that I think most likely to succeed, but I want to use that word advisedly, because we will have difficult limitations with an initiative at the state level, because we can vest the investigation with subpoena powers, indictment powers, the powers of a grand jury. But we can't go beyond that. But we'll be restricted to those powers for that particular state. So if we have several states involved, that gives us a larger venue to exercise this unusual power. What would happen if we discover something? And when I say discover, the scientific work's already been done by these volunteers across the country. No, what I'm talking about, will somebody come forward and fess up to being party to a conspiracy to bring about what happened on 9/11? Now, people say, well, nobody stepped forward at this point. Well, of course nobody stepped forward. Who would step forward? They probably would get killed, first off, or they'd be marginalized, or just look at what happens to whistleblowers in our country. So, no, nobody's going to step forward who's done a criminal deed, and nobody's investigating it. That's the tragedy. We've never really had an investigation of the criminality of what took place on 9/11. And so now if you begin that process, somebody may well come forward. And the who knows where it will lead? I know one thing. If you do nothing, nothing happens. If you do something, something good might happen. And good in that regard is something more informative to the people of this country about what happened on 9/11 than what the government has laid on as a fabric, which makes no sense at all. Look at the evidence. In fact, I'll say this very categorically. Any reasonable person who looks at the evidence that's been brought forward by the various groups who focus their research capability on what happened on 9/11, any reasonable person looking at that has got to come away with the feeling that something has to be done, a real investigation has to be put forward. One of the reasons I am so adamant for a new investigation, particularly by citizens, because whatever is revealed, I, in my heart of hearts, believes that it will have an unbelievable psychological effect on the American populace. And I think we need that. We need for the American people to wake up and to question authority. And that can save this country from going into a tyranny, which I think it's pointed in that direction now. And so an investigation and the results of an investigation of 9/11 could wake up the American people to really what is going on and why they need to participate as citizens in their own governance.